In the same respect, it's almost unrealistic to expect a lot of people to start cycling and walking to work or uni or wherever because of the weather that we live in. And if this was a different country, then this would probably become more of an eco-friendly sort of thing, and more people would walk and cycle. But because it's so cold outside, I guess that's why people use cars more. And the fact that you guys...
I don't think... Can I just challenge that? Because
sure,
there's a big assumption in that it's the weather that determines people's behaviour.
It's one factor.
But if you look at Amsterdam, and if you look at the climate of Amsterdam is slightly worse than that of the UK, and yet in Amsterdam it is the perfect cycling city, and more people opt to cycle than use their cars. So this idea that somehow it's something to do with the weather is absolute nonsense. The evidence is completely against that.
I'm glad you challenged that.
And the difference between Amsterdam and Manchester, though, is that Amsterdam has got the cycling infrastructure. People feel confident. They don't feel as though they need to put helmets on or wear high-vis jackets because they are totally segregated from cars. There's no chance of them being hit by cars, and that's exactly the sort of infrastructure that we're trying to create in Greater Manchester. It's taken Amsterdam since the 1970s to get where they are now. So this is going to get some time, and every intervention is one little step along the way. So if you ask me, will doing something on Trafford Road solve all our transport issues tomorrow? The answer is, of course it won't. Of course it won't. But it is a step in the right direction. It's those many steps like that that will create the sort of city that residents tell us they want to see. When you just talk to people, they say, yeah, I'd love to be able to cycle, but the infrastructure isn't there.
And what about on the Commonplace website? Because I know you guys allow people of Salford to comment on that. And I was talking to Peter O'Hare, and he said that you guys haven't got that many responses because I think people have a sort of almost lack of trust in the council, because there's a lot of promises you guys have made, but they still do need to see it actually.
Well,
in reality.
Yeah, and we're at the forefront of all of this in Greater Manchester. I think that we've had more schemes approved than any other authority in Greater Manchester. Perhaps we've not had as much money as one or two other authorities, but in terms of the number of schemes, we're at the cutting edge of this. But of course, it does take time between when the schemes are consulted on, when they're approved, and when they're actually put in place. So, the Chapel Street, which was the very first scheme in Greater Manchester to get the go-ahead under the Mayor, Andy Burnham's challenge fund. That's one that's we've consulted on recently, and we're just awaiting the final go-ahead before we can actually implement it. But that's been 2 to 3 years of consultation, so it takes time.
I mean, how long have you guys been trying to do this for, and when do you think it will finally be done by, or when's the aim, let's say, for the whole of Salford to have these amazing cycling routes and these things that you guys are aiming for? When do you think it will be done?
I would like it done tomorrow. In the reality, it's going to take at least a couple of decades, I think, before we do that, and that assumes that we continue to have parties elected, a Greater Manchester Mayor elected who's committed to this agenda. We're not talking about flicking a switch somewhere. We're talking about digging up roads and changing the hardware, if you like, of our city, and that does take some time.
And about the Mayor's Trust Fund, the Challenge Trust Fund, and money from that is also being contributed to this development, right? And
Indeed, yeah.
150 million in total or something.
That's right, yeah.
And how much of that is from the Mayor's Challenge Fund, and how many other parties have sort of...
Off the top of my head, I can't give you the precise details, but I think we're the authority that's probably secured the second most amount of money from the Mayor's Challenge Fund, and that's because we've taken a deliberate decision that we want to see this sort of infrastructure in the city, and we've put forward money partly from Section 106 agreements with developers, so big developers coming into the city and making a contribution to this new infrastructure because it supports their developments. And we've also allocated some of our mainstream highways funding into this, and I've said we should use that as a top-up to make sure that we secure the Mayor's Challenge funding.
And back to the drivers and the fact that they could be a bit frustrated with this. The reason I say that is because you're increasing cycling by 2 meters. That's the goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And isn't that going to make the roads narrower? I mean, if you go down Victoria Mile or the Munslow Road, you see that there's a cycle route that goes all the way down the road, but traffic is always congested there, and it's always super packed. Is that because the road has now become narrow because of these cycle routes? Do drivers not get frustrated at that?
I think we're very conscious of the fact that Trafford Road is a major highway, and this started off as a scheme to actually improve the
traffic
highway for car drivers, and it remains the central purpose of the scheme. But what we've done is said, well, while we're doing that, let's take the opportunity to use the very wide stretch of road to improve things for residents and for pedestrians and for cyclists. And the reason why I say improve things for residents is because Trafford Road was always seen as a barrier between Salford Quays, which is a major regeneration initiative, and Ordsall, the Ordsall area, which is the other side of Trafford Road from Salford Quays. And it was almost as if that people from Ordsall were being segregated from Salford Quays, that a relatively poor community was being segregated from a very upwardly mobile community in Salford Quays. It's always been our ambition to break down that barrier, and this gives us the opportunity to do that, because a lot of the cycleways are actually not just down Trafford Road, but it's across Trafford Road, linking up Salford Quays, where we've got one of the biggest cycling communities in Greater Manchester. You know, the number of people who actually cycle to work, we're told by the employers in that area, is higher than anywhere else in Salford, certainly. So part of the scheme involves taking away the central reservation, which is a brick wall with a few bits of trees and stuff hanging out of it, which is a real barrier, and we're going to replace that using it to widen the amount of highway that's available to these schemes. But we're also using tree planting along Trafford Road to tackle another aspect of climate change, and that's making sure that our city is adapted to climate change. One of the biggest threats to our cities, according to the Committee on Climate Change, is surface water flooding. That is the rainfall that can't get into the drains because it's so intense that it overpowers the drainage system. And we have been carrying out experiments in Salford, one with the City of Trees and Manchester University, to look at the role of trees in actually solving that problem. And what we've found is that if we construct special drains, so the water from the highway flows into tree pits,
And then into the drain.
and then into the drain, it actually holds up the flow of water into the drainage system, so it never gets into a situation where it overflows. We're talking about...
So the tree sort of acts like a filter almost.
It's acts a bit like filters. Some of the water will
Absorb into the tree.
will be absorbed by the roots.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it will sink into the ground. But the tree pit itself holds up the water so that
the drains are not getting too
the
far.
hydrologists call peak flow is actually ironed out, so that it doesn't hit those peaks that lead to flooding. So it's helping us combat
Sort of like
flooding.
mini swimming pools, really, that you're creating, so that the water goes into them and not so much into them.
That's right. It's just a very clever way and a natural way of minimising the risk of surface water flooding. So we'll be introducing schemes like that along Trafford Road as well. So I think that in terms of climate change, this is the sort of scheme which ought to be the standard for all highways in the future.